Hello and welcome. I'm Leanne Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Netanyahu says he plans to complete a new Gaza offensive fairly quickly, as at least 5 people die in Israeli airstrikes. Meanwhile, deadly drones have killed 3 in Russia as Trump prepares for a so-called feel-out meeting with Putin on Friday. Ukraine's role remains uncertain. And Trump deploys the National Guard to Washington, D.C. as he cracks down on crime and homelessness in the capital. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he plans to complete a new Gaza offensive fairly quickly. Speaking after his security meeting, who approved the plans to take control of Gaza City, Netanyahu said he had no choice but to complete the job. At least 5 people were killed in the area after an Israeli airstrike on Sunday night. Here's what Netanyahu had to say regarding Israel's upcoming plans.
Given Hamas's refusal to lay down its arms, Israel has no choice but to finish the job and complete the defeat of Hamas. Israel's Security Cabinet instructed the IDF to dismantle the 2 remaining Hamas strongholds in Gaza City and the central camps. Contrary to false claims, this is the best way to end the war and the best way to end it speedily. I don't want to prolong the war, I want to end the war, and I think the other suggestions would have prolonged it.
Netanyahu's comments come as 5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed in an Israeli strike in Gaza City. Their funerals took place earlier today. Israeli military have confirmed it targeted 28-year-old correspondent Anas al-Sharif. Israel believed al-Sharif served as the head of a terrorist cell in Hamas. Al Jazeera have called it a targeted assassination and a premeditated attack on press freedom. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Managing Director of This is Dubai, Michael Jabri-Pickett, and presenter and actress Elena Wallace. Thank you so much for joining me, both of you, this evening. Michael, let's start with you. So we heard a little bit from Benjamin Netanyahu earlier on today, and I was just wondering, what were the main takeaways, did you think, from the press conference? It was a long press conference Netanyahu gave last night, and it was obviously to foreign press, something he hasn't done for a little while. What did you make of the whole thing that unfolded?
So it was a PR offensive. Not only was it to the international media, but it was in English specifically because he knew his main audience would be the American voting public. He needed to make sure that they were at least understanding what it is that he's planning to do. He set out goals, if maybe not a clear strategy, but he talked about what he wants to do. He also made sure that the point was clear that he does not want Israel, so he says, to be in Gaza for an extended period of time. He did double down on his rhetoric about Hamas has to be defeated. He wanted to make sure that he was quite clear about Israel and the U.S. being aligned. He did something quite interesting, which is that he's brought a large portion of the Israeli public together with Russia, China, and many of the international members of the global community, because they all agree that things are at a tipping point. And the starvation that's happening, that Israel is perpetrating upon the Palestinians, has to stop. And they all agree on that. So from that point of view, he was quite successful, even though that wouldn't have been an intended goal.
But it was also quite interesting because I was speaking to a correspondent earlier from Tel Aviv, and he said one thing that also stood out is we did know the plans to go into Gaza City. Netanyahu had made that clear on Friday. But in the press conference last night, it also became clear that central camps and Al-Mawasi will also be infiltrated by the IDF, the Israeli military. So almost an expansion on top of the expansion he was talking about. So more areas is where Israel is now prepared to go into. And Alana, we also heard from the Australian government, who came out yesterday and said it would recognise a Palestinian state in September. And this follows in the footsteps, of course, of the UK, France and Canada. Why did the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, make this decision?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was last Sunday, the 3rd of August, when the pro-Palestinian demonstration was in Sydney, and that was a big controversy, you know, throughout Sydney. The police did not want it to happen. Well, wanted it to happen, but in a place that wasn't going to shut down eight lanes of a bridge, you know, and the Supreme Court ruled that, said no, let it happen. Ambulances couldn't pass from one side of the city to the other, so this was a big deal for this to happen. So the fact that Anthony Albanese has come forward and said this, and he is, like you say, Leanne, he's very much off of the back of the UK, of Canada, of France as well. I think strength in numbers, you know, I really do think that. As it stands, it's only really the US and Israel who are together. The whole of the rest of the world are seeing the horror that is happening in Gaza, you know?
Yeah, and I do think that's true. We are all seeing it unfold right in front of us. We all know exactly what's going on. But recognising a Palestinian state next month at the UN security meeting doesn't stop what's happening now. You know, so it's okay, you can come out and say we're going to recognise a Palestinian state. But one, is it the right time? Because we don't know who's even going to govern that Palestinian state, because we've not heard the US or Israel have any plans after this offensive happens. So is it the right time, or is it just basically, like many people argue, it's just elevating Hamas?
So I don't believe that it's elevating Hamas. It is symbolic, and symbols are incredibly important, but are they enough? There needs to be a complete thinking outside the box, and somebody has to come up with something that none of us have thought of yet. That, I think, is the way forward, because what's happening in Gaza right now has to stop today. And the issue is, as aid workers have talked about, it's not a case of, oh, we can start giving people regular food now. It's going to take weeks to start to get people to be built back up to the point where they were maybe 3 months ago. That takes time. And if you are acknowledging next month that Palestinian statehood should, in fact, exist, that's a nice symbolic gesture, but you still have people who are starving. And that's where, again, something outside the box has to come into play, where people have to, and you and I were talking earlier, maybe the way that South Africa and apartheid came to an end in the early 90s, where it was a concerted economic and cultural series of sanctions and boycotts that came together so that one country recognized they had to change their policy. The issue in Israel is that as long as they have the backing of America, I don't know that any outside-the-box thinking will actually work.
And I think that is the problem, isn't it? I think this is what a lot of countries are trying to do, as you said, force in numbers. But earlier I spoke with Fadi Helani, Senior Fellow at the National Council on the US-Arab Relations, about whether or not Arab nations are putting enough pressure on the US to stop Israel's actions. Just what Michael was saying here. Take a listen.
The Qataris and the Egyptians are, in fact, trying to speak to the Americans about the necessity and the importance of ending the situation in Gaza. And there is an understanding, if the U.S. Was putting some pressure on the Israelis, this could not have happened possibly in the way we are seeing it nowadays, whether when it comes to the number of people killed every day, even including journalists. As you know, this morning, Al Jazeera journalist was killed, or even the starvation, which is happening, of course, in Gaza. So the Arab stance, and especially the Qataris, the Jordanians, and the Egyptians, is very clear on this. This, what they call genocide, has to stop. The starvation has to end. But the Israelis, understandably, if there is no U.S. pressure, no matter how pressure they are getting, whether from the Europeans who are saying they want to recognize the Palestinian state, whether it's from the Arab states, that's not going to happen. The U.S. silence on what's happening in Gaza is understood as an unwritten green light to the Israelis to continue what they are doing.
There we go. So another big thing that's actually happening, sort of black channels diplomacy that I wanted to talk about, is Hamas officials are joining ceasefire talks. So we know that Hamas are reportedly on their way to Cairo as part of efforts to resume ceasefire negotiations in Gaza. The big question is now, can they reach a ceasefire before this offensive by Israel into other areas of Gaza which are currently not occupied stop this from happening? So is this a way to bring Hamas back to the table, possibly?
Some analysts are thinking just that. It would take the Israelis a couple of weeks to ramp things up to get to the point where they're able to go in. And that 2-week, 3-week period could be an opportunity to entice Hamas to recognize things are at a desperate point. We need to actually get to the negotiating table and start talking about these issues. So some will think that what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing is simply just trying to get Hamas to come back together, but making it so difficult for them to walk away. And if he can get them believing that something is terrible going to happen, that maybe they will be enticed.
Let's see if anything will come of those negotiations and those talks, because we know that we've seen this happen before, but we've never actually seen it come to a ceasefire. We did, but that obviously didn't hold. So we will wait to see what comes of these latest talks and decisions. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And 3 people have been killed in Russia in overnight Ukrainian drone attacks, with 59 drones intercepted. 7 of them were en route to Moscow. The strikes come as attention turns to a high-stakes meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin this Friday in Alaska. European leaders are urging that Ukraine must not be sidelined from the talks, with Zelensky insisting Kyiv should be part of any peace negotiations. Writing on Telegram, the Ukrainian president has said Russia is dragging out the war and therefore deserves stronger pressure from the world. Russia refuses to stop the killings and therefore should not receive any rewards or positives for itself. And this is not just a normal position, it is a rational position. Concessions do not convince a killer. Alana, so more attacks overnight as last week's deadline for Trump's sanctions on Russia, I just felt like they kind of came and went. It was almost like we forgot it was going to happen.
Yes, it feels like the goalposts are constantly being moved here. Leanne, like you say, it was all supposed to happen last week. Yeah. It didn't, and now we're going with Friday. It just feels like there's a lot of talk, and you know, again, nothing's going to really happen here. But the fact that 59 drones overnight and all these deaths have just happened again, it's just more killing, more fighting. It's horrendous, and again, something needs to happen. We need to, put a stop to all of this.
And that's exactly what Donald Trump said, because he was actually speaking today. He was speaking of something else. He gave a 2-hour conference, but he did come back to this historic meeting, Michael, that should be happening on Friday. He said a lot of things. He said, I'd like to see a ceasefire. It's a feel-out meeting with Putin. I'm going to tell Putin to end the war. He says, I think we'll have a constructive conversation. And then the big question, going to try to get some territory back for Ukraine. We've seen a lot of talk about ceding territory and territory. But what is going to come from this meeting on Friday? And has it been planned well enough?
I don't think it's been planned very well. We feel it has kind of come together at the last minute. I think it could be an awful situation for Zelensky and the Ukrainians, because how can the wronged party not be at the negotiating table? And, when we talk about swapping of territory, Ukrainian forces hold no part of Russia. It's only the Russians that hold parts of Ukraine. And in Donald Trump's mind, he may be thinking, if I can get the Ukrainian government back half of what they've lost, he might see that as a victory. But no Ukrainian is going to see that as a victory. So when we're talking about swapping territories, it's actually Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian territory, where the Russians maybe give up some here or some there. But again, those are conversations that Donald Trump is talking about with Vladimir Putin. At some point, President Zelensky has to be involved in these discussions. And then while all of that is going on, the EU is feeling this existential threat. You know, aside from Ukraine, there are 5 other EU member states that border Russia. What does that mean? So if Vladimir Putin comes in and takes only 3 or 5% of Poland or Estonia, Donald Trump is going to be okay with that? At some point, you have to be tough with your aggressor, or else they're, you know, if the bully is not dealt with, the bully is going to continue to take and take and take.
And that's so interesting because Volodymyr Zelensky has told European leaders that they must reject any settlement proposal by Donald Trump, which sees them giving up Ukrainian land they still hold, but that Ukrainian territory in Russia's control could be on the table. So that's something that we know the Telegraph is reporting today. So maybe Zelensky is looking to say, okay, right, we need to end this killing. We need to get back to the talks. This could be a way of getting a ceasefire with the blessing of Europe. But it's a really tricky situation, isn't it? Because as you said, people are still being killed. It's still 4 years into this war and it's grinding on. And it just seems to be that we're all in a bit of a stalemate, really.
I mean, again, I'm going to say it's talks about talks. Everyone can say, you know, we're going to meet up and we're going to, you know, have these ceasefire and peace talks. Is it actually going to happen? I will see miracles if it does, unfortunately.
But then again, it always seems like Vladimir Putin has some sort of way of charming Donald Trump, doesn't he? We've seen this time and time again, don't we? We see Steve Witkoff go to Moscow and then nothing really happens. So I'm just wondering if we're going to see this again, or is Trump just going to walk away like he threatened in this and say, you know what, we'll see the parameters, I may leave and say good luck. Trump could just walk away altogether. And then where does that leave this situation?
Because he doesn't have a vested interest in it, he might think that if I can achieve some sort of concession so that Vladimir Putin will stop the killing, which is what Donald Trump has said he wants to do, then in Donald Trump's mind, that might be a victory. But for the Ukrainians, they might say, but we were doing nothing. Our country was invaded. And now, excuse me, Vladimir Putin is getting everything that it is that he wants. What are we getting out of it?
And I think that's a big question. And Donald Trump has actually also said that if a ceasefire is reached, he'll be happy to do business again with Russia, which will obviously put Russia back into the international stage. He's been iced out for so long. But where does Zelensky fit into all of this? As we say, Ukraine was invaded. They've put up one hell of a fight for 4 years, haven't they? And Zelensky's gone everywhere. He's gone all over the world. He's called on everyone to help the country. And what will this mean for him to give up his territory? And how can he keep, you know, the Ukrainians on his side? And how can he keep morale in the forces? Because they must be exhausted by all of this.
I think what it comes down to is really everyone is not wanting to get on Russia's bad side completely. I think maybe that's where it leaves him ultimately. He's in a...
And I mean, the hard thing is they had these talks on Friday without him. Are the talks even worth anything?
Well, there's still some doubt if he's going to appear or not. But I think if Volodymyr Zelensky is smart, and I think he is, he could use himself as a bargaining chip, which is if he's able to throw in, I will step down and we'll have new elections, where he is putting his country first, and then that maybe takes some of the pressure off of Donald Trump, and maybe it allows Vladimir Putin to save a little bit of face, because maybe I didn't get everything I want, but the guy who was leading that country, he's gone. He was willing to step away. That might be something that, like, there are so many different opportunities for people to see the chips that are on the board, to see the cards. Remember, that was the big accusation Donald Trump made to President Zelensky in the White House. You know, you don't hold the cards. But if he does recognize that he does have that opportunity, also, it's becoming incredibly expensive for the Russian government to continue this war, for all of the new army personnel that join, they have to give them a massive signing bonus.
So it's interesting that you say that, because Russia's actually currently the most sanctioned country in the world, but they are having a really good GDP, and a lot of that is because they're still on a war footing. And, you know, obviously there's shadow oil going to India, which is making them a lot of money, and going to China and going to lots of other countries. So even though we say that, Russia has done extremely well up against these economic roadblocks that those sanctions have put into the country. So it's fascinating how they've kind of stood up in the face of adversity, and I think that's what the Russians would pretty much argue.
I agree with you, but a war footing works because, you know, at a certain point it will end.
Yeah.
You can't stay on war footing for generations. And I think that the Russians recognize that this is working for now, but certainly it's not sustainable for, you know, another 4 years.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think the Ukrainians and the Russians probably feel it. And it's the volume of the men. You know, Ukraine has apparently lost at least 1 million men, which is extremely... Sorry, Russia has lost 1 million men, and Ukraine, the statistics are, you know, they're changeable because no one really knows. But we're talking about huge volume of young lives here. Let's see what happens on Friday. I think everyone's going to be tuned in for the optics of that Alaska meeting with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. And President Trump has announced he's deploying the National Guard to Washington, D.C. as he pledges to crack down on crime in the city. That means the city's police will come under federal control. Here's what he had to add during a White House press conference earlier today. Take a listen.
Now about possible result of the Trump-Putin meeting. I think most probably that they will claim, first of all, air truce. So stopping of the bombing of the big cities far from the front line. It's first. Secondly, there have been agreed sectoral ceasefire on the south of the front line in Zaporozhye and Kherson region. Then they will decided that it is would be very good to have exchange of territories. Russia will give to the Ukraine those Ukrainian territory which they control in Sumy region, Kharkov region, Nikolaev region, and Dnipropetrovsk region. And Ukraine will give to Russia those territory which it can control in Donetsk region. It's an exchange of 1,500 kilometers to the 7,000 kilometers. It's look not balanced by figures, but you should take into account that Russian army is winning, Russian army is going forward, and Ukrainian army is going back.
So I just want to let you know, of course, that was not Donald Trump. That was Sergei Markov, a former Putin advisor to Moscow. We paid you the wrong clip there. But we are now going to talk about the latest on Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. He did give a 2-hour press conference, just to let everyone at home know that. Michael, that was a long conference. He had a lot to say. What did you make of it?
So say what you will, you know, Donald Trump is 78.
79.
79, pardon me. He has pretty good stamina. I don't know too many 79-year-old men or women who can stand up in front of the media and answer questions for as long as he does.
And always give a sharp answer. It's pretty incredible. I do often think that. I think he's always got something to say. Like, sometimes I would just be like, I don't know what's going on.
He has an opinion. He has a point of view. He's not shy about sharing it. He's not shy about talking, you know, and turning things around. So from that point of view, it's impressive. And what I like about Donald Trump is that he sees something and then he talks about it. And I think too often politicians will run into a situation where they just accept the status quo. But in this particular case, he's talking, and it seems as though he's getting things a little bit mixed up between crime and homelessness. But imagine if he spoke about what he saw, and then he said to, he posted on Truth Social something to Republicans and to Democrats. I want you to meet 4 times over the course of the next month. I want you to come up with a bipartisan plan that helps us solve the homelessness issue or the violence in Washington, D.C. And he sort of challenged them to come together, work as Americans to make this city great again. Imagine if he did that. Instead, he takes this approach where he sees something, he tweets about it, and then he wants to bully through an executive order, or he wants to take advantage of a loophole, he wants to call in the National Guard. And really, the issue that he's concerned about, again, he seems to be mixing up sometimes the homelessness with the violence in the city, and the violence in the city is less than it's been before. But, you know, the homelessness issue, a city of Washington size, you have 700,000 residents, only about 3,700 homeless. Most are in shelters, so you're only talking about 800 people at any given night who are out on the street. That is not as bad as he's making it out to seem. But he does have an idea about wanting to fix the cosmetics rather than looking at the symptoms. You know, instead of wondering why we need to build more prisons, maybe he should be digging a little bit deeper and saying, I don't want us building more prisons. That's not the solution. The solution is to get to the net problem.
And I think this is what people were trying to decipher out of this 2-hour conversation that he did have, what we learned about Trump's plans for DC, and maybe we'll find out a little bit more about that. But can we really put homelessness down to a rise in crime? Like Michael said, it's intertwining these two things, but is that actually fair?
I mean, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, is completely rejecting these ideas, you know, that Trump is throwing at her. As you said, Michael, 30 years it has been, you know, the crime has been low in 30 years in Washington. So Donald Trump is all about the cosmetics and how things look, and he wants to ship these homeless people out and not actually solve the root of the problem, you know, like we were saying before. And personally, I don't think it would be. Of course, you're going to have some homeless people causing a bit of the crime, but overall, absolutely not. I think the fact that he is just tarring all the homeless, you know, like you say, around 800 people with the same brush, I think it's disgusting. I think it's not correct. And clearly, because the facts are saying, you know, the crime rate hasn't been this low for 30 years. It's the first time. So
well, Donald Trump did have some stats with him, and when he read out those stats, Washington, D.C. looked like it was basically on par with Baghdad, and that's comments we have heard from the Trump White House regarding this Washington, D.C. story. But actually, the data for this year suggests that robbery has fallen by more than a quarter and homicides by 12% compared with the same time last year. But there is a difference in crime figures, apparently, when it comes from the DC police and by the FBI, but there's not that much discrimination. So what is Trump's end goal here? He says, you know, he could move the homeless people into a tented accommodation where they have access to medical facilities and washrooms. That possibly could be a good thing to maybe get them back onto the right track if it's done properly with the National Guard, Michael.
Yeah, he has this great ability, you know, the old Steve Bannon quote, right, to flood the zone, where Steve Bannon would say that if you're a Republican, the opposition is not your enemy, it's actually the media. And what he'll want to do, especially right now, you know, we haven't talked about the Epstein files in quite some time because we have the summit with Vladimir Putin on Friday. Will Volodymyr Zelensky be there? We now have this where Donald Trump is, because it's DC, which is a district rather than, you know, a state, he has a little bit more control as part of the federal government. So he's calling in, you know, the National Guard. He wants to, he sees an issue, he wants to correct it. I don't know that it deserves a 2-hour press conference for this, but it gets people talking about this, which is what he wants to control the narrative, and he wants to be the center of attention, and he does a wonderful job of that. But there are other issues that the media could be focused on, but because the President of the United States is there, that's the one that they do focus on.
He blindsides. He's so fantastic at going, look over here. We spoke at this before, the magician effect that he has. He's fantastic at it. And I think this is another example.
And, you know, he had big hitters with him today when he had that press conference. We saw Pam Bondi, and we also saw Pete Hegseth, sorry. So Donald Trump was bringing out his top team when he wanted to make sure that this message on Washington, D.C. should get through to his supporters and appeal to his MAGA base. So much, thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. US fashion designer Willie Chavara has apologized for a shoe design he made in collaboration with Adidas Originals after it was criticized for cultural appropriation. The shoe was inspired by traditional leather sandals made by indigenous artisans in Mexico. The Mexican president was among those who spoke out against the footwear, which was reportedly made in China. Now, Elena, this is actually a fascinating story when we have a look at it. You know, the designer has faced backlash against this. Tell us more. What's gone so wrong here?
So, of course, the Mexican people are taking massive offence to the design of the sandals. I personally think that he didn't mean any malice, any disrespect. I mean, his father is half Mexican within his career. You know, he's had a fabulous career. Last year, he was the senior vice president of Calvin Klein. Times Magazine has just voted him part of the 100 most influential people in the world. He's always highlighted Latino culture and, you know, paying homage to the Latino community throughout his career. I really don't think there was any kind of malice or disrespect, like I say, in this. And now he's paying a massive, massive price. I do feel there is an element of course, fashion is art. And I think within art, it's always a diluted version of something that we've seen and maybe been inspired by, sometimes not even consciously, subconsciously. We've seen something, taken that and put it out, trying to claim it as our own. I'm not saying that this happened in this situation, but that could have potentially been. And now he's paying the price for this, but he has come out, he has apologized, taken ownership, and yeah, it's he's in the press, he's been spoken about, we're speaking about it right now, right? So he's just going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. But like you said, you know, art is really an imitation and we all get inspired from something, don't we? Even if it's pop music nowadays or art that we see, often it's inspired from other people. So do you think that designers, Michael, and they might need to think a little bit more before they take inspiration? You know, because we've seen other big fashion brands come under fire with sandals that were inspired from Indian culture. Now we're seeing it from the Mexican culture. Does there need to be a bigger thought pattern behind this and maybe work with the artists from those countries to make a design?
Certainly, there needs to be more of a concerted effort to go forth and do your research. In this particular instance, because the designer and Adidas have come out and they both apologized, my argument would be, and I've said this to colleagues, editors, and journalists who I've worked with for decades, that it's a two-step process. If you don't like something, you get to criticize it, absolutely. But step two is you have to come up with a better idea. And while everybody has come forth and apologized, if the designer or Adidas had stepped forward and said, and used it as a teaching moment, and said, we made a mistake, teach me, show me. So if the Mexican president had been approached by Adidas and Adidas said, can you introduce us to the communities that we need to speak to so that we don't make this mistake again, so that we're in a better position, we're better educated, we can then make sure that we're working with the right people. This, to me, would have been the next logical step in the process, rather than just everybody trying to not get canceled, everybody trying to make sure that they get their apology out there as fast as possible so there's not a lot of backlash.
But could there also be another way that we're all talking about it now? And could these sandals become really popular and make more money for those people in Mexico, the artisans who are making them,
Of course,
maybe?
I mean, an image of the sandals has been taken offline for now. So we can't currently see them right now. But I do think that would be a fabulous PR move, you know, for them to do that. But we don't know what they're being advised to do legally as well. You know, Adidas, of course, one of the biggest corporations in the world, they were obviously, you know, forced to push through this apology. And cancel culture is such a thing these days. They're probably just terrified of that,
This
you know?
is one of the things that I know I've learned from my children, as well as the incredibly popular people, especially on TikTok, is authenticity.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you come forward, and I know the legal department might be saying one thing, but if there's somebody who's senior enough to say, you know what, we're going to use this and we're going to lean into the apology.
Be
and
brave with
yes,
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that I always just apologise if I've done something wrong, but maybe Michael will be inspiring me now to then come up with
But we need Michael, head of our PR team. We do.
Yeah, I feel like, Michael, I remember now, I will apologise with a solution. I think that is the way to go forward. But such an interesting story because the controversy follows years of efforts by the Mexican government and artisans to push back on major global clothing brands who they say copy their designs. So it's not just Adidas, Zara, Anthropologie and lots of other fashion brands have been called out by the Mexican government for this. So it is something that they're aware of and they want to make sure, as you say, that the people making them in Mexico get a fair pay and are involved in it. But thank you very much for your thoughts on that. And finally, Michael and Elena have come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. Michael, I absolutely hate this story and I'm really upset that you came up with it because I saw it on the news and I hoped that you wouldn't, but you did. And it's about this horrible, controversial... I know I've just basically said I hate it from the beginning, but tell me why you chose this story.
I'll tell you why I know you hate it.
But I think Elena would agree with me. It's horrible, isn't it?
Well, let's
So
Yeah.
it is. It's a clickbait story that is a little bit about bait. So a zoo in Denmark, a local zoo, has put out a social media post on Facebook asking for unwanted pets to be donated to the zoo so that they can feed the predators. That's the top line. Now, if you dig a little bit deeper, we're talking about chickens, rabbits, guinea pigs, and surprisingly, horses.
Little ponies, yes, I saw that too.
Yes.
I read something, I saw a lady interviewed on the news who had actually given her old pony. She came out and spoke about it, yeah.
And there's also,
Yeah.
I don't want to generalize, but I'm going to generalize. European society seems to be a little bit more in touch with the realities of the food chain. Whereas some cultures, I'm thinking mostly in North America, where they're a little bit too sensitive about the realities and they don't want to see it. Now, in this particular case, let me get this in, if they had not called them pets, and that seems to be what's caused the controversy, but it's also what has, I think, helped them drum up business. The reason they want pets, what they've said is that animals, they will gently euthanize them and then they'll be able to feed them to the predators. And they need to make sure that the predators have as close to a realistic experience as though they were in the wild, which means they need their system, their digestive system needs to go through the process of dealing with consuming something that has fur and bone and all sorts of... So you can't just give an animal fresh meat from the butcher shop. It needs to be something that's more authentic. And I do wonder if the word pets is going to be used next time. Now, the zoo has said this is a policy and an approach that they've taken for a long time.
And I did see that, and I did see the zoo come out and say this isn't the first time that this has been requested. It's something that's pretty normal in Copenhagen at this zoo in Denmark. But I just think pets is what stood out to me. And I thought, how could you give up your little pony?
Of course you don't want to, but if the... let's use the pony as the example.
Yeah.
If the pony is super ill or super sick towards the end of its life, then you may as well give it back to the food chain, give it back to nature. I'm a massive animal lover. I absolutely love all kinds of animals, really, I do. But I do also think that you've got a really good point there of letting whatever it's a tiger, a lion, like it's in its natural habitat, kind of hunt for this other animal. So the digestion is, how it would be in the wild. That's a really, really valid point.
As they say in The Lion King, it's the circle of life.
It's the circle of life, it is.
And we're not talking about like a German shepherd, being handed over to the zoo.
Not my Chihuahua King.
Yes, exactly.
None of my dogs or anything.
Yeah.
I just want to say that, I don't know. And also apparently, just before I move on, because I know we're running out of time, they had to cull some baboons. Culling is also, of course, something, but they fed those baboons to the animals. So anyway, everyone, I need to get off my high horse about that story. Not literally, the pony. Let's move on. Let's go to yours. Yeah, too many. Yours is about a new feature on Instagram. I don't know about this feature. I've not heard about it.
Right,
Why
yeah,
is
so-
it invasive? What's the situation here?
Okay, so Meta has quietly rolled out a new feature on
Really?
Instagram, just in the USA at the moment.
Okay.
It's going to come out globally soon. And it's caused a bit of controversy because basically what it is, within the Reels section on Instagram, there'll now be a section where whichever Reel you have liked, your friends can see which Reel you've liked. And it's all neatly in this little section
What
with
do you
your
mean?
profile photo.
What, of any person?
So say you like my Reel
Yeah.
on Instagram, everyone who follows you, all of your friends on Instagram, will be able to see.
My
that you've
God, so
liked
many
it.
cheaters are going to be caught
Yes,
out,
well,
aren't they?
that's what I thought as well, which I'm a massive fan of because I'm like, let's expose
Yes,
them all.
it's going to expose
Yes.
every single cheater out there.
Which is fantastic, you know. I mean, tell me you're a millennial spy without telling me you're a millennial
Oh my gosh, we
spy.
all are. Yeah.
And, but yeah, of course, in all seriousness, people in America, some people are saying this is diabolical. They want whoever's designed this feature to be sacked and all the rest of it. But I think, look, if you're on social media anyway,
Yeah.
you have to be an open book. Like, that's the kind of, you know what game you're playing. You're entering a space that is very much
I better stop
out in the
liking.
open. So don't like anything that you want people to see, basically.
No, the
Leanne. It's the moral of the
firefighters
story.
videos. No, but everyone will see that. You can
Yeah.
like, oh gosh, I think this
you only
is
have to worry about your
minefield.
boyfriend seeing them.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I think it's a whole minefield.
But I mean, look, but here's the thing, and it's like the ongoing joke within social media, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always catching people out. It's always
Yes.
exposing people.
Always.
And I think, again, like, if you're in that realm, then you have to be open to being caught. But look, Instagram are saying, I just need to say this, Instagram are saying it's so people can connect via a different way and, you know, discover. And like, for example, say if I saw you liked a Reel, and then the next time I see, oh, I saw you like that Reel. I didn't know about that. And then that's a conversation struck. It's a conversation, you know, that you're going to learn something from. So that's why Instagram is saying that they're going to do this. But yes, Leanne, I agree. Let's expose the cheaters.
I'm up for this cheater expose. Go on, Insta. I mean, it's also a bit creepy at the same time, but we won't talk about that because social media pretty much is. But that's all from us on W News Extra. Thank you so much to today's guest. Managing Director of This is Dubai, Michael Jabri-Pickett, and presenter and actress Alina Wallace. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. GNT with Tom Burgess Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.